Welcome. You found your way to a quiet space, one shaped not by battle cries or fire, but by salted fish, thick wool, and the slow rhythm of old waves. Tonight we leave behind the thrones and temples, and sail gently toward the longhouses and fjords of early medieval Scandinavia. Not the Viking of legend, but the Viking of quiet labor, cold feet, and never quite dry socks. Over the next 2 hours, you'll live the daily life of a Norse settler. You'll wake before dawn in a smoky hall. You'll haul icy buckets, salt stubborn fish, and patch your only tunic. You'll learn what happened to real raiders after they returned, and what those who stayed behind feared most: famine, ghosts, and bad harvests. Each segment offers a calm, deeply detailed look into Norse life. Not the violent myths, but the slow, grinding truths that shaped a hard, beautiful world. If this journey helps you rest, please like and subscribe, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is. Let's begin, not with a sword, but with your calloused feet in the frost-wet straw of a Viking longhouse. The hearth smokes, the goat stirs. You're up before the sun, and the chores never end. Imagine this: you're not a warrior. You're a working soul, a farmer, a weaver, maybe a part-time herder. And you live in a long, low building made of timber and turf. There is no insulation. The walls are packed with sod and hope. The smoke from the central hearth has no chimney. It rises, thick, pungent, stinging, and slowly filters out through a hole in the roof. Your bed is a low platform along the wall, covered in coarse furs. It smells faintly of damp earth, wool, and the sour breath of livestock. Because yes, the animals sleep inside too, and at least in the winter. You rise before dawn, the air is cold. The floors are dirt, your feet find your sandals by feel. Your first task? Break the thin ice in the water bucket. Stoke the fire. Coax damp wood into something resembling warmth. There is no privacy, no silence either. Children whispering, sheep coughing, someone snoring across the hall. You eat hard bread left from yesterday, maybe a bite of cold porridge. Your fingers are still stiff from sleep, but work begins. Among the tasks of the day, everyone works. Children tend to animals. Women stir vats of curdling milk. Men patch nets, repair tools, haul bundles of hay. You repair a fence with splintered hands. Carry baskets of manure. Sort fish dried to leather-hard strips. Tools are handmade, nails are precious. Everything smells of salt, sweat, wood smoke, and sour whey. Cold, hunger, and darkness. In winter, light barely touches the edges of the day. You work by lamplight or fire glow. Oil is precious, torches are short-lived. The wind finds cracks in the walls. It whistles through the gaps in the roof. Your cloak is stiff with use. Your socks never dry fully. If you're lucky, the evening brings a stew. Root vegetables, dried meat, maybe a splash of milk. If not, more barley, more bread. After dinner, the hall quiets. Someone sharpens a blade, a child hums. You mend a tunic by firelight. The air is thick with warmth, noise, and smoke. You lie down with a full belly if it was a good day, and if not, you just lie down. Or you do not dream of conquest. You dream of an easier harvest. Fewer rats, a gentler winter, and you sleep wrapped in sheepskin. The sound of the hearth crackling softly nearby. And next we'll meet someone who did seek the sword, waiting but not for glory, for escape. You left your home not for glory, but for food. Not to conquer, but to survive the next winter. The image is familiar. A ship slicing through cold waves. A warrior with braided hair and a battle cry. Villages burning in the distance. But the truth quieter, hungrier, more uncertain. Most Viking raids didn't begin in fury. They began with need. Why men left the fjords farms were small. Brothers quarreled over inheritance. Winter came early and left late. There weren't enough good plots of land. Too many mouths, too little silver. To raid was a gamble. A way to gather wealth, bring home prestige, or simply come home with something. There were no uniforms, just thick wool, leather, and a borrowed axe. You might be young, unmarried, unproven, or older, trying to secure a better position back home. The ships were long, narrow, not comfortable. You slept beneath the stars, or under damp canvas, rode for hours, ate dried fish, felt your skin salt-caked for days, always at the shore. When you landed, there was no battle plan. You moved fast, took what you could, avoided soldiers, feared getting trapped inland. Some settlements had barely enough to steal. Some offered bribes to be left alone. Some fought, and some of your shipmates did not return. Raiding wasn't a career, it was a temporary season, like fishing or harvesting. Most raiders weren't hardened warriors. They were part-time farmers, fishermen, woodcutters, and trying to survive another year. The return home. If you survived, you returned. You might carry coins, jewelry, salt, spices, or just stories. There was no parade, but you earned a place at the table, perhaps more respect, perhaps a chance to marry, or a gift of land from a chieftain. But if you failed, you returned poorer, humbled, sometimes wounded, and sometimes not at all, on the toll of the sword. Those who raided often carried the weight of it quietly. You remembered the scream of a priest, the smoke of a church, the look on a child's face. You did not speak of it over stew, but it stayed, in your dreams, in the way you sharpened your knife, in the prayers you muttered when no one watched. Mike's out now. Rest your thoughts upon that ship, swaying gently on a gray sea, your hands blistered, your eyes searching the horizon, not for war, but for land, and for peace. Next, we step off the ship and onto cold northern soil, to explore what Viking villages truly looked like beyond the sagas. It was not a city, not even a town, just a cluster of timber buildings huddled against the wind, bound by labor and luck. A Norse settlement was not built to impress. It was built to survive. No stone palaces, no towering walls, just wooden beams, earth-packed walls, thatched roofs, and the smell of ash, salt, wool, and beasts. You wouldn't know you were near one until you smelled the smoke, heard the goats, or saw the thin line of washing strung between posts. Midanan layout and life homes were long, low buildings, long houses, made of timber frames and insulated with turf or straw. They clustered around shared wells, animal pens, and sometimes a tiny dirt-paved path worn down by foot and hoof. There were no roads, only trails. And in wet seasons they disappeared into mud. Nearby sheds stored grain. Workshops were scattered, blacksmiths, tanners, weavers. There were no shops, no markets in the modern sense. Trade happened through quiet barter, familiar hands exchanging goods, often without coin. The settlement moved at a rhythm that matched the land. There were no clocks. Time passed with the seasons, the sun, the livestock. People and Roll's children were everywhere, barefoot in summer, wrapped in wool in winter. They tended geese, gathered firewood, carried water in sloshing pails. Women brewed ale, milked goats, spun wool, stirred pots. Men repaired tools, hunted, fished, built fences. Elders sat near fires, offering advice that no one asked for, and yet everyone followed. On sounds and smells you'd hear chickens, oxen lowing, the thunk of an axe, the scrape of wood on wood. You'd smell smoke, boiling meat, damp straw wool soaked in lye, and through it all a sense of movement, not hurried but constant. Seasons of the settlement. In spring, everything was mud. In summer, a flurry of farming, patching, drying, preserving. In autumn, a panic to store enough. In winter, stillness and hunger. The settlement shrank in winter. People stayed closer. Rooms grew stuffy, crowded, restless. Stories were told. Repairs were made. Old rivalries festered. No two the same. Each Norse settlement was slightly different. Some near forests, others by fjords. Some isolated, others linked by trade and kin. But all of them, quiet, smoky, hard-worn, were places of grit, rhythm, and memory. So if you wandered through one now, you'd find no warriors in armor. Just farmers in cloaks, weavers with cracked hands, and children with red cheeks chasing hens in the mud. And it is there, in the cold earth, the smoke, the softened footsteps, that the true Viking world was lived. So next we look at the walls inside those long houses, where gods were honored not with thunder but with carved wood and quiet offerings. No temples, no pulpits, just carved gods by the hearth and a quiet sense that the unseen shaped all things. To live as a Viking was to live with the gods, not in fear but in familiarity. There was no sacred day of the week. No scrolls, no official sermons. Belief was woven into the straw of the roof, the shape of a bread loaf, the direction a raven flew. The gods were among you. Odin, the All-Father, god of wisdom, war, and wandering. He was not gentle. He demanded sacrifice, but he also whispered to those who listened. Thor, the Thunderer, protector of common folk, carried in amulets shaped like his hammer, trusted to guard ships and fields alike. Frey and Freya, for fertility, love, harvest. invoked at weddings and births and in the quiet corners of daily hope. Loki, a trickster not hated, just understood, as life too was unpredictable. But no grand temples. Most homes had a small corner, a herger, a shelf, where a carved figure stood. It might be nothing more than a face carved into driftwood or a stone with strange patterns. Sometimes these gods were passed down, oily with age, polished by hands now long gone. Offerings were simple, a splash of ale, a strip of meat, a whispered hope. In some settlements, outdoor gatherings were held, blots, ritual feasts where animals were sacrificed and their blood marked sacred stones. But this was rare, expensive. More often, religion was personal, woven quietly into habit and superstition. Signs, omens, and dreams were not idle things. They were watched, interpreted. A wolf in sleep might mean a bad harvest. A woman weeping, a warning. Birds were studied, storms feared. No journey began without a glance at the sky, a whisper to the wind, a protective charm tucked under a tunic. The dead were not gone, burial was not the end. Some were laid in ships, others in mounds. Grave goods were offered, knives, beads, food, tools, because the next world would need them. The dead might still walk, restless, angry, so people were careful. They spoke softly of the departed, left bread at crossroads, hung iron over doors. Not just myth. A lens religion wasn't doctrine. It was a way to explain hardship, fortune, the frost that came too early, or the lamb that lived against all odds. It was a system built not on control but on awe, of nature, of mystery, and of that deep, silent thread that ran through the world. Aeonia, so now, as your thoughts grow soft and your breath slows with the rhythm of old prayers, picture a hand-carved god lit by the flicker of fire, watching silently as the household sleeps. Next, we'll follow the trail of cloth and combs to discover how Vikings looked. Not the rugged myth, but the daily, deliberate grooming of a people who prized appearance. The Viking world was not wild and filthy. It was deliberate, layered, and surprisingly well-combed. We often picture the Norseman as rough and ragged, mud on his boots, blood on his axe, and a beard like an untamed forest. But the truth, he owned a comb. So did she, and they used them. A cleanliness by necessity. The Viking world was not clean by modern standards, but dirt was not romanticized. Lice were real. So were skin infections, smells, and the discomfort of filth. So they fought back. Combs were carved from antler, often beautifully detailed, and carried on a belt in decorated sheaths. There were tweezers, ear spoons, even nail cleaners, all common items found in graves and hoards. They bathed when they could, and often in streams or tubs. In Iceland, some used natural hot springs. In Denmark and Sweden, washing was a weekly effort, especially on Saturday or Laugardagur, washing day, which gave us the modern word, Saturday. Hair and beards' hair was important. Men often wore it long, sometimes braided. Beards were trimmed, not wild. Women kept their hair tied back or under head coverings, depending on their marital status. Blonde hair was admired, and it's believed some even lightened their locks with lye. Clothing function, first. A Viking's wardrobe was simple but not drab. Linen undergarments. Wool tunics over top, trousers or dresses. Cloaks fastened with brooches or pins. Color was common, dyed using plants and minerals. Ochres, reds, blues, muted greens. The wealthy might wear imported silk trims. The poor rougher weaves, belts were essential. On them, a knife, a pouch, perhaps a key, a comb. Footwear was soft leather, stitched by hand, shaped to the foot. There was no armor in daily life. Only layers and more layers, especially in winter. Jewelry and identity. Both men and women wore jewelry, rings, armbands, brooches. Not always for decoration, sometimes for trade. A silver bracelet could be clipped, its weight used in barter. Some wore hammer-shaped pendants, small thors around the neck, as symbols of faith or protection. Wig appearance as reputation. In a society built on honor, appearance mattered. A man who looked disheveled might be seen as careless. A woman in torn clothing might invite gossip. You dressed not just for function, but for standing. You were watched and remembered. So now close your eyes and picture yourself tying a leather cord around your wrist, adjusting a wool cloak, combing your beard with slow, thoughtful strokes as the mist curls just beyond the longhouse door. You look the part, And in this world that matters. But next we move indoors again, to the warmth of firelight and the rhythm of tasks, to explore what Viking women did every single day, from dawn until long after dark. From dawn to darkness she spun, stirred, stitched, and kept the household running with quiet, endless labor. To understand Viking life, you must step inside the longhouse, not as a warrior, but as a woman. There in the smoky, warm center of the Norse world was her domain. Not lesser, not idle, but constant. A day without rest. She woke early and before the fire burned high, before her children stirred, before the frost melted from the water bucket. There were no servants, only hands on her hands, and whatever help she taught her daughters to give. Bread had to be kneaded, milk churned. Grain ground by hand on stone. She cooked over open fire with soot in her hair and embers stinging her eyes. No recipes. Just instinct, repetition, and what the land allowed. Spinning and weaving clothing didn't appear from markets. She spun flax into linen, carded wool, dyed it with roots and bark, wove it tightly, stitched it carefully. The loom stood in the corner of the longhouse, a tall, upright, warp-weighted loom. It clicked and shifted all day like the sound of time passing. Weaving wasn't just domestic work. It was trade, status, survival. Some textiles were beautiful, some plain, all necessary. Brewing and preserving. She brewed ale, a staple drink safer than water. She salted fish, smoked meat, dried herbs, and monitored the larder. If a winter lasted too long, it was her planning, or misfortune, that determined whether the family stayed fed. Our children, elders, animals. She kept the children dressed, the elderly comfortable, the animals fed and inside when the winds grew fierce. She calmed fears, told stories, taught songs, prayers, and chores. There was no school, she was the school. Showed honor and autonomy. Viking women could own property, inherit land, divorce husbands. They ran farms when men were away, settled disputes, managed silver goods and dowries. Their brooches were not just decorative. They signaled status, lineage, and strength. Their evening and reflection. After dark, the longhouse settled. She might mend a tunic or whisper a story to a drowsy child, perhaps sit with her comb, untangling a day's worth of knots. No diary, no portrait, just memory, passed down in woven belts and careful stitches, in the rhythm of daily work that shaped the Norse world. So now, as your eyes grow heavy, imagine her hands, so often at work, so rarely still, folding one final blanket as the fire burns low and the quiet of the longhouse settles into rest. Next, we leave the chores behind and step quietly into the stories they told. Tales of giants, wolves, and a world destined to end in ice and fire. From dawn to darkness she spun, stirred, stitched, and kept the household running with quiet, endless labor. To understand Viking life, you must step inside the longhouse, not as a warrior, but as a woman. There in the smoky, warm center of the Norse world was her domain. Not lesser, not idle, but constant. A day without rest. She woke early and before the fire burned high, before her children stirred, before the frost melted from the water bucket. There were no servants, only hands on her hands, and whatever help she taught her daughters to give. Bread had to be kneaded, milk churned. Grain ground by hand on stone. She cooked over open fire with soot in her hair and embers stinging her eyes. No recipes. Just instinct, repetition, and what the land allowed. Spinning and weaving clothing didn't appear from markets. She spun flax into linen, carded wool, dyed it with roots and bark, wove it tightly, stitched it carefully. The loom stood in the corner of the longhouse, a tall, upright, warp-weighted loom. It clicked and shifted all day like the sound of time passing. Weaving wasn't just domestic work. It was trade, status, survival. Some textiles were beautiful, some plain, all necessary. Brewing and preserving. She brewed ale, a staple drink safer than water. She salted fish, smoked meat, dried herbs, and monitored the larder. If a winter lasted too long, it was her planning, or misfortune, that determined whether the family stayed fed. Our children, elders, animals. She kept the children dressed, the elderly comfortable, the animals fed and inside when the winds grew fierce. She calmed fears, told stories, taught songs, prayers, and chores. There was no school, she was the school. Showed honor and autonomy. Viking women could own property, inherit land, divorce husbands. They ran farms when men were away, settled disputes, managed silver goods and dowries. Their brooches were not just decorative. They signaled status, lineage, and strength. Their evening and reflection. After dark, the longhouse settled. She might mend a tunic or whisper a story to a drowsy child, perhaps sit with her comb, untangling a day's worth of knots. No diary, no portrait, just memory, passed down in woven belts and careful stitches, in the rhythm of daily work that shaped the Norse world. So now, as your eyes grow heavy, imagine her hands, so often at work, so rarely still, folding one final blanket as the fire burns low and the quiet of the longhouse settles into rest. Next, we leave the chores behind and step quietly into the stories they told. Tales of giants, wolves, and a world destined to end in ice and fire. These weren't just letters, they were sounds, spells, symbols, carved with care and never without meaning. Imagine holding a smooth bone comb. On its edge, a line of strange, sharp-angled symbols. They aren't decoration, they speak. Not loudly, not clearly to us centuries later, but to the Vikings they were powerful. They were runes. The Futhark alphabet. The Vikings didn't write with curved letters. They used runes, straight lines and angles designed to be carved into wood, bone, or stone. Their alphabet was called the Futhark, named for its first 6 sounds: F, U, Th, A, R, K. There were different versions: the Elder Futhark, the Younger Futhark, and regional variations. But all shared one thing: each rune had a name, and each name held meaning. For example, Safahu, wealth, cattle, prosperity; Raito, journey, movement; Algiz, protection. So to write was to invoke something. Reed and carved, not scribbled runes were not scrawled on parchment by candlelight. They were carved and carefully hot into surfaces that would last: stones beside roads, wooden beams of homes, metal blades and jewelry. Everyday tools, each stroke deliberate, each mark filled with intention. What did they write? Not long books, not scrolls, short, sharp messages. A name, a blessing, a boast, a memory. On a sword hilt, I am the bane of giants. On a stone, Thor bless this farm. On a comb, remember me. Some were playful, some protective, some mysterious even now. Runestones, memory in stone. Across Scandinavia, great standing stones still remain, covered in runes often curved into spirals or snakeskin patterns. They weren't gravestones exactly. More like public memorials or monuments to the dead carved by the living. They might say, this stone is raised by Bjorn in memory of his brother who died in the east. Sometimes they mention raids, foreign lands, faith, loyalty. Each stone tells a fragment, a voice from 1,000 years ago still standing in the grass. Magic and belief runes were more than writing. Some believed they held power, used in charms, carved for protection, worn as amulets. In sagas, runes could heal wounds, drive away spirits, or unlock doors. They were not everyday things. They were touched with the sacred. And so now picture yourself carving your name, or a wish, into driftwood, your fingers cold, your breath white, your blade slow and steady. A message not for today, but for memory. Next, we travel farther, not by foot but by sail, following the Viking expansion into lands far beyond the fjords. Not conquerors, but settlers. Not empires, but fragile outposts, wind-beaten, sea-bound, and utterly alone. When the lands of Scandinavia grew crowded and the chieftains feuded and the farms grew poor, some Vikings turned away from war and toward the sea. The push and pull of migration. What sent a Viking to sea? Sometimes exile, sometimes ambition, sometimes famine, or a whispered tale of greener coasts told over a smoky hearth. So they built ships, loaded sheep, tools, seed, and set sail not to raid, but to begin again. To Iceland, a cold new home. Around the year 870, Norse settlers arrived in Iceland. It was volcanic, windy, and wild, but it was empty. They found hot springs, fertile valleys, fish-rich coasts. They carved turf homes from hillsides and established a thing, a gathering of free men to make law. Here, without kings, they built a society based on clan ties, honor, and seasonal meetings. But the winters were long, the soil shallow, and even here feud and famine followed. Still, they stayed. Greenland, the harsh frontier, around 985, Eric the Red, exiled from Iceland, sailed west with followers. He named the place Greenland, a clever name to lure settlers. But the truth, it was not green. Not for long. They built farms along the fjords, raised cattle, traded ivory from walrus tusks, lived in sod houses huddled against the ice. But Greenland was fragile. When the climate cooled, the sea roots iced over. Trade faltered, harvests failed. By the 1400s, the Norse settlements vanished, their farms silent, their churches crumbling. Ivanland, a dream to the west, around the year 1000, Leif Erikson, son of Eric the Red, sailed even farther west. He found a land with wild grapes, forests, gentle rivers, and game. He called it Vinland. We believe it was somewhere in Newfoundland, Canada. The Norse built a small settlement, but it didn't last. Conflict with indigenous peoples, isolation, and supply problems forced them back. The dream of Vinland faded, but its memory lingered. Our world spread thin. The Vikings didn't build empires. They built footholds scattered, vulnerable, brave, and in those lonely outposts, Icelandic valleys, Greenlandic fjords, the edge of Newfoundland's forests, they lived, struggled, sang, and remembered. So now imagine yourself at the prow of a longship, the wind snapping your cloak, your eyes squinting into gray mist, searching not for gold, but for land. A place to begin again. Thus next, we return from the waves to the inner world of Viking justice, a world without police where honor, vengeance, and law were settled beneath open sky. No judges, no jails, just oaths, witnesses, and the weight of your family's honor echoing in a quiet field. In the Viking world, there were no courtrooms, no black robes, no prisons, but there was law, and law was sacred. A society without kings. Most Viking societies were not ruled by monarchs. Instead, power rested in clans, interwoven families who protected and avenged their own. Disputes were not settled by decree but by negotiation, often tense, sometimes bloody. The Thing. Law in the open. The Thing was the cornerstone of Norse justice. An open-air assembly held on a hill, a field, a rocky cliffside. There, free men gathered, and there disputes were aired. Land rights, debts, accusations of theft or murder, all brought before the crowd. There was no yelling, no shouting of guilt or innocence. Instead, witnesses spoke, oaths were sworn, and a decision, usually by respected elders, and was given. Us, the law speaker. At the center stood the law speaker, a man with no book, no scroll, but a memory trained by years of listening. He recited the laws aloud, verse by verse, in steady rhythm. It might take hours, sometimes days. In Iceland, the entire body of law was committed to memory by one man. He did not rule. He remembered. Feuds and blood price. If a man was killed, the matter did not end with mourning. The killer owed a vergil, a man price, unto the dead man's family. If paid, peace could be restored. If not, a feud could begin. Feuds were not crimes, they were expected, managed, balanced by years of alliances, gifts, threats, and forgiveness. Sometimes feuds lasted generations. Sometimes they ended at the Thing. Sometimes they ended with blood. Honor above all justice was not just about fairness, it was about reputation. To be dishonored, to fail to avenge a wrong, to break an oath, to lie before witnesses, was a wound deeper than steel. It marked your family, your children, your memory, so people spoke carefully, acted deliberately, because every act echoed beyond themselves. So now picture yourself standing in the long grass beside your kin as the law speaker's voice rises, steady and slow, carving memory into air. No judge, no gavel, just the weight of words and the quiet shifting of men deciding what is right. Next, we step beyond the law to the battlefield, and not the myth, but the experience, to ask what it really felt like to fight and to fall. They did not charge blindly into battle. They planned, feared, bled, and prayed, hoping not for glory, but to return home whole. Forget the sagas for a moment. Forget the heroic charges and axes flashing in sunlight. The real Viking battlefield was not glorious. It was chaotic, terrifying, cold, and often very short. Before the battle, a raid began not with shouting but with silence. Men gathered at the shore, checked weapons, tied sandals, drank a mouthful of ale, maybe said a prayer to Thor or Odin, and just in case. They were not invincible. They were not fearless. They were human. Fathers, not sons. Some had never fought. Some had killed more than they wanted to admit. They knew that not everyone would come back. The weapons they carried, a Viking's toolkit for battle, was simple, but effective. A round shield, wooden and light, painted in colors. A sword, if he was wealthy, often named, sometimes inherited. An axe, common and deadly. A spear, light enough to throw, strong enough to thrust. A helmet, usually plain iron, conical, not horned. Mail, for the lucky few. Most fought in layered wool or leather. They formed shield walls, tight, disciplined lines overlapping round shields. The wall moved forward slowly, step by step, each man protecting the one beside him, until someone broke. Then came the chaos. Like when things fell apart, no horns, no music, just shouts, grunts, metal against wood. When the shield wall broke, it became a scramble. Feet slipped, swords stuck. People fell. Most wounds came not from grand duels, but from behind, from confusion. Death was quick or slow, but always close, Ondur. What they feared most, to die far from home, unburied. To be forgotten, to leave family vulnerable, to have no song sung. For all the talk of Valhalla, most hoped simply to return. To see the fjords again, to hold a child. To sit in the hall and drink beside kin. On the aftermath, the survivors would strip the fallen. Bury or burn the dead if they could. Bind wounds with cloth, limp to their ships. There was no triumph, only relief, or quiet mourning. Later, in the longhouse, the tales might be told. Names remembered, deeds slightly improved, a drink raised, but even there, the eyes of the old men held the truth. And so now, as you lie still, imagine the shield's weight on your arm, the silence before the first clash, and the hope, quiet and simple, to return with your name unshamed. Next, we leave the battlefield and climb the narrow social ladder to understand what power meant in this world. Not gold, but loyalty, land, and the gift of a sword. In the Viking world, you rose not by birth alone, but by the hands that followed you, and how well you kept them fed. Power in the Viking world did not come from a throne. There were no crowns, no royal scepters passed down with jeweled ceremony. Instead, power was personal, earned, kept, and sometimes lost. One meal, one sword, one promise at a time. And who was a chieftain? A chieftain was not a king. He was a leader of men, a manager of land, a giver of gifts, a keeper of oaths. He did not rule because of law. He ruled because people chose to follow him. They followed because he was fair, because he fed them, because he protected them. And if he failed, they left. The bond of gift and service. At the heart of Viking politics was the gift. A chieftain gave a sword to a warrior, a silver brooch to a craftsman, a cow to a farmer. Not as charity but as obligation. Fought when called, served in the hall. This was the gift cycle, a system older than memory, woven into every clan, every hall. Ours the bondsman. A powerful chieftain gathered bondsmen, men who ate at his table, wore his colors, and carried his honor in the world. They might be warriors or merchants, or landholders. What mattered was the tie between them, a tie stronger than law. If a bondsman was insulted, the chieftain responded. If the chieftain was threatened, the bondsman stood beside him. It was personal. It was political. It was survival. Hospitality and feasting. Much of this loyalty was maintained not with speeches but with food. The feast was a political tool. Ale flowed, meat was carved. Stories told, gifts passed. All of it said, I am strong. I can care for you, stay with me. Ambition and fragility. Some rose quickly. A successful raid, a smart marriage. A well-placed gift, but power was fragile. A single lost battle, a bad harvest, a broken promise. And the web of loyalty unraveled. So chieftains ruled with constant attention, balancing pride and humility, generosity and strength. They were not gods, they were men, surrounded by other men who watched closely. Well, so now close your eyes and picture the hall. Firelight on wood beams, a man standing at the head of the table lifting a drinking horn, offering thanks, and reminding everyone, not with force but with presence, why they follow. Next we move to the quiet end of life, to what the Vikings believed awaited them after the last ale was poured and the longhouse grew still. They did not bury the dead to forget them. They buried them to send them onward, dressed for eternity, wrapped in memory. Death came often in the Viking Age, quietly from fever, suddenly from war, unexpectedly from winter's grip. But when it came, it was met not with silence but with ritual, because death to the Vikings was not an end, it was a departure. Overtouching the body, the dead were washed with care, combed, clothed, sometimes in their finest wool, sometimes in armor, sometimes with favorite tools, beads or blades. A woman might be buried with her keys, her spindle, her brooches. A man with his axe or his drinking horn. These were not just objects. They were companions for the journey. On burial or burning, some were buried in graves, mounded with earth, stones marking the place. A quiet ship-shaped outline in the ground. Others were placed on pyres sent to the sky with fire. The choice depended on region, wealth, and belief. There was no single way, only the hope that the soul would travel well. Ships for the afterlife. If a person was wealthy, they might be buried in a ship, in real or symbolic, a vessel to carry them to the next world. Inside, weapons, jewelry, food, animals. Even servants in rare and controversial cases. It was not excess, it was preparation. They were going on a long voyage. Where did they go? The destination varied. Some believed in Valhalla, a hall of warriors in Asgard where fallen fighters feasted forever. Others spoke of Folkvanger, where the goddess Freya welcomed the noble dead. Those who died of illness or age might go to hell, not a place of torment but of quiet cold. It was not about punishment, it was about placement. You went where you belonged. On grave goods and memory graves told stories. A simple knife meant a hunter. A gaming board meant a strategist. A broken sword a warrior mourned. For archaeologists today, these burials speak in fragments. For the Vikings, they were messages to the future. A way to say, I lived, I mattered. I was sent off with honor. So now picture the burial mound, a faint rise in a grassy field. A cold wind, a family standing quiet, placing the last stone, then walking away, leaving the soul to journey on. Next, we look at those left behind, the children of the North, and what it meant to grow up in a world of hard winters, old songs, and quiet hope.
No toys with batteries, no schools with bells, only chores, stories, and the steady rhythm of growing into a hard world. In a Viking village, children were everywhere. Quiet hands beside looms, quick feet chasing goats, wide eyes staring into the firelight as the elders told tales of gods and ghosts. They were not burdens. They were not idle. They were part of the rhythm. And birth and naming birth was always uncertain. Midwives knew herbs, but not all babies lived. Not all mothers survived. If a child lived past the first week, they were named at a naming feast. Sometimes after a grandparent, sometimes after a god. Sometimes for a trait, stout, bright, stone. The name was a gift and a hope. By about early years, babies were wrapped in wool and carried close. Wooden rattles, small carvings, and animal bones served as toys. Mothers, aunts, and older siblings shared the care. There were no cribs, no separate rooms, only firelight, wool blankets, the sound of chickens and wind. Learning by doing by 5 or 6, a child's world widened. Boys learned to fish, herd, carry tools. Girls learned to weave, cook, watch infants. There were no schools, but there was education. From watching, copying, repeating. A boy might be given a small axe, a girl, a needle, not as playthings, but as responsibilities. And by 10, they could work beside adults. Tell stories as lessons. At night, in the hall, they listened. To tales of Thor, of clever Loki, of brave ancestors. These weren't stories for entertainment. They were moral guides, cultural maps. A child learned not just what to do, but who they were. Adulthood came early. By 12 or 13, a boy might join a raid. A girl might be promised in marriage. There were no long adolescences. Just a shift, from child to adult, measured in actions, not years. Ceremonies were few, but the change was known. A girl received her keys. A boy took an oath, and suddenly they were seen differently. But still, there was play children carved animals, played board games like Hanafataful, made up songs, wrestled in the mud. Even in a harsh world, there was laughter, curiosity, imagination. Because children in any age are still children. So now picture a child squinting in morning light, feet bare, holding a wooden pail, glancing over their shoulder to see if the calf is still following them. No words, no story. Just the small steps of a Viking becoming. Next, we close with a final reflection on what we've seen, what we've imagined, and what traces the Vikings left behind for us to remember them by.
Not just swords and ships, but echoes in stone, whispers in stories, and quiet fingerprints on the modern world. The Vikings are gone. Their long ships no longer glide over silver fjords. Their halls lie buried beneath farms and fields. Their voices silent. But their presence lingers, in places, in language, in how we remember the past. Archaeology. The Earth still speaks across Scandinavia, Britain, Russia, and beyond. Archaeologists uncover fragments. A twisted brooch beneath a plowed field. A game piece carved from walrus ivory. A comb tucked into a grave. Each piece small, each discovery patient. And from these clues, a picture is slowly rebuilt. We learn how they dressed, what they ate, how they lived, and how they died. The ground, quiet for centuries, still has stories to share. And words from the north, you speak Viking every day, though you might not know it. Words like sky, egg, knife, husband, window, and the days. Thursday, Thorsday. Tuesday, Tyre's Day. The Norse language slipped into English like a stream into a river. It's still with us out in how we talk, how we name, how we think. Place names and paths. Look at maps across Britain and Ireland. You'll find names ending in by, meaning farm or village, thorp, outpost, wick, trading place. These are Viking footprints, linguistic fossils pressed into the landscape. Even in North America, in Newfoundland's Lanceau Meadows, a tiny Viking site still holds its quiet place in history. In our imagination, the Viking Age ended 1,000 years ago, but it never really left. It lingers in television, novels, games, and films, in horned helmets, though they never wore them, in longships cutting through stormy seas, in the quiet admiration for resilience. But the truth is quieter than the legend. The real Viking world was made of hard winters, worn hands, faint songs, and fierce loyalty. It was human. Why remember them this way? Because in the quiet details they feel closer. Not just as warriors, but as people who cooked, worried, laughed, and hoped. They were not giants, they were not monsters. They were flawed, brave, clever, tired, and cold, like all of us. And maybe, in learning how they lived, we understand our own lives a little better. So now, as the story fades and the night grows still, imagine a ship on a gray horizon, sails half raised, a figure watching the shore disappear. The fire in the longhouse burns low. The past once noisy now rests, and so may you.